On a Saturday morning in April, Lucas Hargrove handed over $100 at a salvage yard and towed home a car that looked like it had been dead for decades, paint stripped to bare metal, roof seams eaten through by rust, a license plate barely readable. His neighbor, Diana Caldwell, stood at her gate, coffee in hand, and laughed loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "You just taught your son the fastest way to waste money," she said. Lucas said nothing. He looked at the car and went to work. 5 days later, a racing legend arrived at that same driveway with a check for $5 million. What was hiding beneath all that rust? Stay with this story. The answer is something none of them saw coming. Lucas Hargrove was 34 years old, and he had the kind of life that didn't photograph well. He woke at 5 every morning, packed a school lunch for Wyatt, checked the handwritten schedule pinned to the refrigerator, and walked out to the converted garage behind the house where he worked as a freelance mechanic. Word of mouth kept him busy enough. It paid the bills mostly, and on the months it didn't, he didn't mention it to anyone. His wife Sarah had died 2 years earlier in a car accident on the interstate. The other driver had walked away. The medical bills she left behind had not. Lucas paid them down in chunks, quietly, without announcement, without looking for sympathy. The neighbors on Marlowe Street mostly thought of him as the quiet man with the truck and the little boy. They were not wrong, exactly. They just hadn't finished the sentence. Wyatt was 7, missing a front tooth, and devoted to a stuffed bear he carried everywhere. His mother had named the bear Bolt the night he was born because she had loved racing, loved the blur of speed and the smell of engine oil. The bear had lost one button eye and been repaired twice with mismatched thread. Wyatt did not care. Lucas almost never talked about Sarah. When Wyatt asked questions about her, he answered them fully, but he did not volunteer stories on his own. The grief had settled in him the way sediment settles in still water, invisible on the surface, permanent underneath. Elijah Cross was Lucas's only real friend on the block. He was 40 years old, ran a small repair shop at the end of Marlowe Street, and had the useful quality of knowing when to talk and when to sit in silence with a cup of coffee. On Friday evenings he sometimes brought sandwiches over, and the two of them would eat in the garage while Wyatt did his homework at the workbench. He was the only adult in Wyatt's life that the boy called by his first name instead of sir or uncle. Diana Caldwell had moved to the street 18 months earlier. Her house had a black front door, a white Audi parked at a precise angle, and window boxes filled with flowers that never seemed to wilt. She was 31, worked as a real estate broker, and operated by a set of standards she had never consciously written down, but enforced with absolute consistency. She was not a cruel person. She simply had no habit of pausing before she spoke. She and Lucas had exchanged perhaps 40 words in 18 months. She had once suggested, with a smile that technically qualified as friendly, that he might consider finding a neighborhood that's a better fit. He had looked at her for a moment and then gone back inside. She interpreted this as rudeness. He interpreted it as the only reasonable response. Marlowe Street was the kind of block where information traveled faster than it had any right to. Houses sat close together. Windows faced windows. People walked their dogs slowly and made eye contact. Whatever happened in one driveway was general knowledge by the following morning. Carter Voss had operated Voss Auto Salvage for over 30 years on the eastern edge of town, in a lot surrounded by chain-link fence and the faint smell of transmission fluid. He was 60, practical to the point of bluntness, and priced his inventory by intuition rather than research. On the morning Lucas arrived to pick up a carburetor for a regular customer, Carter was in the middle of liquidating a large collection of vehicles that had come out of a private storage facility whose lease had expired. The estate executor wanted the lot cleared by Monday. Carter wanted the money. Neither of them cared much about provenance. Lucas was walking along the back row when he saw it. It sat in the far corner of the lot, half shaded by a rusted corrugated roof that had been leaning for years and never fell. The body was a 2-door coupe, black, or what had once been black, before weather and time had reduced the paint to a patchwork of bare metal and peeling finish. But there was something in the proportions that stopped him. The wheelbase was longer than it should have been for something that size. The angle of the windshield was steeper than any production car from that era. The wheel arches were shaped by hand. He could tell that without touching it, just from the way the curve met the body line. Someone had thought about this car for a very long time before building it. He put his hand on the rear quarter panel before he made any conscious decision to do so. The metal was cold. Under his palm, through the rust and the grime, he could feel the bodywork, not stamped, not pressed by machine, but shaped and finished by hand. It was slight, the difference, but to a man who had been touching cars his entire life, it was unmistakable. Carter walked up behind him. "That one's $100. Take it today, or it goes in the crusher Monday morning. Lucas stood still for a long moment. He thought about Wyatt's shoes, which were a size too small, and had been for 6 weeks because the timing was never right. He thought about the electricity bill sitting on the kitchen counter. He thought about the fact that he could not have explained, under any reasonable questioning, why he was standing here with his hand on a rusted car he knew nothing about. He paid the $100. When he opened the driver's door to check the interior before towing, a small piece of a sticker peeled away from the bottom edge of the doorframe and drifted to the ground. He picked it up and put it in his pocket without looking at it closely. He would look at it later. He didn't know why that mattered, but it did. The tow home was slow and slightly absurd. Elijah's pickup, the rope, the rusted coupe drifting behind at 15 miles an hour, with its dead steering making it wander slightly in the lane. They pulled onto Marlowe Street at 9:40 in the morning, and by the time they reached Lucas's driveway, there were at least 6 people watching from various distances. The woman across the street lingered behind her curtain. 2 kids on bicycles came to a full stop. A man walking a retriever paused at the corner and did not resume walking. Diana was at her gate. Lucas had not seen her there when he turned onto the block, but she had been there for a few minutes already, as though she had known the right time to be outside. He heard her clearly. He heard the neighbor laugh, just briefly, before catching herself. He heard the words, "poor kid," and he felt them land, not on him but near Wyatt, who was standing at the edge of the driveway with his backpack still on from the morning, having come outside when he heard the truck. Lucas did not turn around. He put the truck in park, got out, and said to his son, "Go inside and get my tool bag." Wyatt looked at Diana once. Not with anger, with something more careful than that. Then he looked at the car, the same way his father had looked at it in the salvage yard, with his head slightly tilted as though he was listening for something. Then he turned and went inside. Lucas began unhooking the tow rope. He did not rush. He did not perform composure. He simply was composed, in the way of someone who had already processed pain far larger than the opinion of a neighbor and come out the other side still standing. That night, after Wyatt was asleep, Lucas went to work. He set up 2 work lights in the garage, put on the small radio he kept on the shelf between the wrenches and the socket sets, and began cleaning the car methodically, the way he did everything from the bottom up, from the back forward, slowly enough to see what he was dealing with. He used a solvent cloth on the floor of the driver's footwell, and the grime came away in sheets. Underneath, stenciled into the bare metal of the floor pan, was a chassis number. He looked at it for a long time. It was not a standard format. It did not match any VIN structure he had ever seen. The prefix was a 7-character string, beginning with the letters R, A, and C, followed by 2 digits and 2 more letters. He photographed it with his phone. He ran searches for 40 minutes and came up with nothing definitive. He found a reference to a European racing registry that used similar prefix conventions in the early 1970s, but the specific string matched nothing in any public database he could find. He sent Elijah a message. "You ever seen a chassis prefix starting with rack, 67? Elijah replied 11 minutes later, "Nope. Go to sleep." Lucas did not go to sleep. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the sticker fragment he had picked up in the salvage yard. He held it under the work light. Most of it was gone. The adhesive had dried to nothing over the decades, and the paper had dissolved at the edges. What remained was a portion of a logo, a stylized wheel, and, beside it, what appeared to be a simplified flame rendered in a bold graphic style. He did not recognize it immediately, but something about the design, its precision, its confidence told him it had not been made to decorate a streetcar. He taped the fragment carefully to a clean piece of paper and went inside. The next morning, Elijah came over early, before the coffee had finished brewing, because Lucas had called at 6:45 and said only, "Come take a look at something." Elijah stood under the car on a rolling creeper for 5 full minutes without speaking. When he came out, he sat up slowly and looked at Lucas with an expression that existed somewhere between professional concern and badly suppressed excitement. "The frame has been hand-reinforced," he said, "not factory. Someone welded additional gusseting on every junction point. That's not a weekend project. That's months of work, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." He stood and walked to the front of the car, opened what remained of the hood, and leaned in. "Lucas, this is not a stock block. This has been machined, bored out, and machined by hand." He straightened up. Whoever built this car was building it for something specific, and they had serious money and serious knowledge. Lucas had already taken photographs of the suspension components. The geometry was wrong for a streetcar, specifically wrong in the way that indicated custom track day tuning. The springs, where he could see them, were not standard catalog parts. They had been fabricated. That afternoon he found a specialized forum for vintage racing vehicles, an old, text-heavy site with few photographs and members who had been using the same usernames since the early days of the internet. He created an account, uploaded the photographs of the chassis number, the suspension geometry, the body curves, and the sticker fragment, and wrote a careful, factual description of what he had found. He asked if anyone recognized any element of the car. By the following morning there were 47 replies. This was, by the standards of the forum, extraordinary, the forum members argued. Several were certain it was a well-executed kit build from the 1980s, someone's ambitious project assembled from racing catalogs and salvaged parts. 3 members, who identified themselves as having professional backgrounds in motorsport history, were less certain. One of them, posting under the name GarageLegend_TX, wrote, "If that chassis number is authentic, you are looking at something that has been on a missing persons list in this community for 15 years. Another member sent a private message. "Stop posting public photographs. Trust me on this." Lucas printed the thread and put it in a folder. That evening Wyatt came into the garage after school and sat on an overturned plastic bucket, which was his customary seat for the times he watched his father work. He had Bolt the bear in his lap. He watched his father polish the rear panel for a while and then said, "Does the car have a name yet?" Lucas thought about it. "Not yet. You want to pick one?"